Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, men and women, non-conformers and non-believers, gender X and gender equals, welcome to Eat the Storms, the poetry podcast. My name is Damien B Donnelly, and let's start by saying a thank you to you, the listeners, for tuning in. Whether that has been on Spotify, Apple, Anchor, Google, Breaker, Podbean, Player FM, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Castbox, Podcast Addicts, iTunes, or any of the platforms where we are now available. We are now hurtling towards Christmas Day, and just last night here in Dublin, Ireland, the snows came early and blanketed Dublin in a frosty white stillness. Today it may be frosty, but the sun is glaring down, and on the show today, that sunlight will be coming from 4 guests from here in the Republic of Ireland, in Northern Ireland, and 2 guests joining us from the United States. And I'm delighted to welcome back Karen Mooney today, who will be continuing her series of interviews with poets called Inside the Storms. So that's enough from me. It's time to hand you over to my guests. So please ensure your feet are up, the tea is at hand, the cake has been sliced, and the marshmallows are ready for toasting later. This is Eat the Storms, and I hope you enjoy the show. For my first guest today on the show, we are jetting off from snowy Dublin here in Ireland and heading over to the United States for a returning guest to the show who's just had their debut collection published this year by Iceflow Press called Talk Smack to a Hurricane. And today she is going to be sharing poems from that collection that explores her mother's mental illness, postpartum issues, psychiatry views on women and anti-Semitism. She has been published in various journals and has been on the podcast here, like I said, and also on Calling the Arts. A finalist in the 2020 Red Wheelbarrow Poetry Prize from the US Midwest. I'm delighted to welcome back to Eat the Storms, Lynne Jensen Lampe.
Hi, Damien. Thanks for inviting me back on Eat the Storms podcast. Today I'll be reading poems from my debut collection, Talk Smack to a Hurricane. It was planned to be a chapbook, but we kept adding poems, so now it is a full collection of regular lineated poems, erasure poems, prose poems. Iceflow Press published it in September. The book is about my mother's severe mental illness and its impact on our relationship. We were separated for most of my first year because she was in a hospital. She was hospitalized many other times during my life, too. The poems also touch on psychiatry's view of women, as well as anti-Semitism. My mom's side of the family is Jewish, and I was raised Jewish. The first poem in the book is 5 vignettes. The first 4 are based on photos. The last is a favorite memory. And the reason I'm opening the book with this poem is I want to show the tenderness in our relationship. 5 photographs square with my mother's truth. She grips me, the ceramic bird, the 5 and dime she can't bear to put back on the shelf. I mug for the camera, snug in her arms and out of the drifts, feed myself a mitten of snow. She wonders how she'll pay rent. She lounges in pajamas a couple weeks after my birth, holds my whole left hand with her thumb and forefinger. Caught in profile, she smiles her cheekbone and chin into a question mark without a question. We push a rotary mower, my mother in capris and me in diapers. I stretch, belly out, to reach her hands on the wooden handle. She closes her eyes, breathes in her favorite scent, cut grass in summer. The 2 of us stand on the tarmac, minutes before she hoists me on her hip and climbs metal stairs to board the plane. She wears pearls, high heels, a black sheath dress. I'm in pleats, patent leather shoes, and awe. I sprawl our green vinyl couch, head in her lap. My mother strokes my hair, tucks it behind my ear. Her hands, African violet velvet and careful as tears. Like always, she calls me doll, hopes I never break the way she does. This next poem is about desperation turned to hope. Chiaroscuro. The moon drums its fingers across Carnelian Lake, shrugs, waits for the loon cry. Suckle pears fester on the ground, soft and meaningless. Blisters weep for winter, feed what could become spring. Could, conditional tense, what we wish for, hope for. The gaze is everything, silent scabs thought, and all dead belong to the king. God, religion's needle, dull blue bruise. Hurt means feeling, and feeling means alive. We knuckle our fear. We hope our feet to the floor every morning. A new song drops, and we dance in the kitchen, throw open our curtains to the sky. I've been working on these poems one way or another for decades. The first mama poem I had published was when I was around 20, and now I'm 63. She was in private or public facilities so often in my life. One of the worst was a state hospital in Louisiana. And in researching what the conditions were there, I came across asylum records from the 1880s for that particular facility. Those records figure in this poem, as does some information about palmistry and even the DSM, which stands for Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. Fingered. I write poems with hands like hers. Rounded fingertips smudge the page with mental health and mental illness. Blister as power dictates the same old social contract between doctor and patient. Love me, revere me, obey me, I'll say you're healthy. In 1883, the state insane asylum in Jackson, Louisiana, swallowed Emma Caribee, 58. Recorded diagnosis, noisy and troublesome. Viola Wade, 36, deceptive in her affections. Comfort Kemp, 27, homicidal mania due to giving birth. Renamed East Louisiana State Hospital, the asylum admitted Louise, 34, my mother, already tethered in 1968 to the DSM via the fraying rope of schizophrenia and manic depression. Bipolar disorder with psychotic features due to giving birth. Being pregnant changed her brain chemistry, she said. I heard, you cause my crazy, never get pregnant. But maybe she was telling me every woman changes after making a child, and she was willing to risk being someone new again. She'd already worn skins named daughter, writer, smoker, grad student, traveler, wife, mother, unmothering, when another family adopted her first child, patient, and now mother again, juggernaut of emotions, and hormones splatter small rooms of the heart chemical red, track years in sulfur and saffron, kitten heels and paper slippers. Palmistry considers conic fingers a sign of creativity, intuition. Psychiatry considers womanhood a disease. This next poem isn't so much a story as a comparison and contrast. I paired different words or different lines to show ways that my mother and I are the same or different. And if you hear a word on its own, that's something that we have in common. Glass tongues, Teflon, cast iron, piano. Words string us together, weeping, cherry blossoms pink as old scars. Mother, daughter. Burns, cordials, filter tips. Falls, whiskey, clove cigarettes. Psychotic, psychedelics. Fertile, barren. Nurturing. Uncut the cord as daughter snaps her bag of lies, whistles to a mother no one knows. Cord uncut, words untethered, tongues untempered glass. Thank you so much for listening.
For my second guest on the show today, we are coming back here to Dublin, and I'm delighted to say that I got to take part in the launch of this poet's debut pamphlet, Physical Education, which was published by Green Bottle Press just last month. That launch was at Books Upstairs, the bookstore here in Dublin, Ireland, and she very generously invited myself, Eileen Dupuer, Karen Mooney, Gaynor Kane and Paulina Cosgrave to join her for that lunch, which became a poetry party. So thank you very much, and now today I am delighted to be able to give her space on this platform. I'm very happy to hand you over to Lauren Lawler.
Hello, my name is Lauren Lawler and I'm going to read a couple of poems for you. This first poem, this is a little bit of a risk because it's a brand new poem. And it's inspired by, last year I really enjoyed watching the 2021 Olympics, and I was particularly fascinated with the women's Russian ice skating team, and they were nicknamed the Quad Queens because of the amazing jumps and leaps that they could do, pushing the sport forward, but perhaps in quite a dangerous way as well. So this poem is called Quad Queen, and it's for Sasha Trusova. The quadruple Lutz requires the skater to anchor a toe pick into the ice and with a strong back take a reckless leap, launch at least 20 inches, twist, complete 4 rotations. Smaller girls spin fastest. Regular weigh-ins, 2 shrimp, a radish, a cup of water, a blue, white and red Wonder Woman dress for the Russian girl. Her body grows taller and lazier, ungainly wide hips, a real tragedy when the element falls out of her reach, becomes dangerous for an older girl. She knows she can't be 14 forever. Of course, her body begins its failure. This next poem that I'm going to read is called Church of the Holy Family. My neighbour gave me a lift to school with her violent son in her creaking red Fiesta, on the strict condition that I got up early to attend Mass. The church was 3 timber prefabs laid out in the shape of a cross. My neighbour said I didn't have to sit with them. I sat behind them. I didn't know the prayers or responses, didn't know the ash on my forehead would win me approval with teachers. The incense made me speechless. When I shook damp hands with the son, I thought of him beating his dog. I lied, said I quit sugar for Lent. But when I tongued out the jam from the donut, my red-rimmed mouth repeated, Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world. This next poem that I'm going to read is called The Home, and it's from a pamphlet that I brought out in September called Physical Education. It was published by Green Bottle Press. And fortunately, The Home will be published in the next edition of Poetry Ireland Review, the Evan Boland special edition. The Home. I paint my mother's nails red. They are jagged and left alone. She tells me to stop picking. I file off every sharp edge, scrape the underneath. We've been talking about the thousands of tiny bones wrapped in cloth, stacked in the belly of a septic tank. She tells me they're not ours, not my family or my history. We'll leave them be. Stop picking. I make sure to pass the old laundry on Sean McDermott Street, past the demolition sites and scaffolds, foundations of new hotels. I try to write a poem called Magdalene, outline an image where the girls in white nightdresses leave their beds and pad barefoot down the hallway, almost there, on the precipice between the smell of carbolic soap inside and the night city outside. Hands wrong, they face the locked doors and turn to ask, where are we going? Where are we going to go? This next poem is also from Physical Education. I don't think I've ever actually read this out loud. I think I'm probably a little bit too shy to read it out loud, but the podcast format makes it an awful lot easier. So here we go. This is called Werewolf Syndrome. At first it came as stubble, dappling your cheeks and forehead, joining up your Frida Kahlo brows, then reaching down, reaching further, chest and back, groin and armpit, where it grows long from every pore and follicle. It's all over your bed sheets. The debris of your body clogs the sinkhole, molted tufts everywhere. Strands stick the bath and fridge door. The neighbourhood boys call you a dog, and you abide. Crawl outside at night, lift your arms and howl. Maria finds it sexy. You remind her that you are not a fairy tale, a predator with a polite facade and bestial appetite, and she is not a morsel to be devoured. She tells you she shaves until her skin is raw. Isn't it funny, she says, what I find attractive in you, I hate in myself. You kiss her when she tells you, and oh, your insides are broiling with the alien drug and the hormone imbalance. Oh, the wet of her kiss, on the lips of your wet, the mouth on your breath, on your skin, on your sweat, the hair on your neck stands up. She says, I want to burrow you in like a flea. Years later, in a new city, you remember this time as myth or fantasy. You say to another girl, you won't believe this, but when I was 16, I was a werewolf. You remember the time Maria said, I want you to hunt me like a table leg. So this next poem, now that we're on the theme of teenage lust, I think it's gone in that direction. I'm going to be a bit cheeky here and read a poem from one of my favourite poets, Sarah Berkeley. This poem is called Facts About Water. She published this collection in 1994. I believe she was about 20 or thereabouts, and I bought this collection when I was about 15, and I was really excited to find out that Sarah Berkeley had went to my secondary school, which was Manor High School in Raheny. So this poem is called Facts About Water. Be ready for the flood, they said. I gathered my skirts. No flood came. Beware the danger that comes with a man, they said. I waited for the fall. In blinding light, he stumbled to us from the stones. Was this the man? He fell at our feet. Fire, famine, flood. Give him his name, they said. I was drawn to the man. I told him, this is your name. And then he was all I saw. The first I knew of endless, immeasurable calm, the whole struggle over and done. I had expected pain. Instead, he treated me with care, folding and wrapping. I had never been given before. He gave me to myself, said without saying, love if you will, but be warned, I have very little. Here was a man without the anchor of dreams. He blinked in the sun. He hardly seemed at home in his set of bones. I felt his uncontrol, reined in with a shaky hand. I said, if you need me in the night, call out. Trains run beneath my house. His flame flickered, but did not go out. I conjured a green field to steady him, no gate, no way in or out, but a cool mile of young grass and 4 spare dry stone walls to hold him in. I had never held anyone in before. In return, he brought me to his shore. He wrote in the sand facts about water: minimum, fathom, barrel, cord, magnum, gallon, jeroboam. He said, when you wake far out, dream about, and with these things make good your return. And he wrote sextant, compass, dipstick, dial, plumb, octant, nautical mile. He left me sleeping. I woke without fear in a rigged vessel, sails and mast. I dreamt my way to dry land, acre, arpent, section, square, league, light year, township, air. Thanks very much.
Now we have a slight diversion to the normal routine of the podcast, as I'm delighted to welcome back Karen Mooney to Eat the Storms. Today she is continuing her interview series Inside the Storms. Today Karen is joined by Lynda Tavakoli, who you might remember if you purchased a copy of The Storms, our new journal of poetry, prose and visual arts, as she was one of our shimmering contributing poets. Today Karen discusses writing, its origins and its inspirations as she sits down with Lynda at her home. Lynda's debut poetry collection was called The Boiling Point of Jam, and just before I hand you over to Karen, I'm going to read you just a little excerpt of a review on the Poetry Foundation by Leila Benitez James. The Boiling Point for Jam by Irish writer Lynda Tavakoli is a debut with a scope of new and collected. Like a modern angel of history, the speaker in these poems observes how the past becomes the present and the present loiters somewhere in the past. How even as we move inexorably into the future, our perspective remains locked in remembrance. The titular poem offers a helpful hinge at the book's centre, demonstrating the quiet command of the quotidian. There is peace in the ordinary, the boiling point for jam, the quiet release of a latch, the skirting of his arms around her waist. Power comes in allowing your attention to clutch common objects, knowing how the mind might drop them. This is Inside the Storms with Karen Mooney and today's guest, Lynda Tavakoli.
This is Karen Mooney for Eat the Storms Poetry Podcast, and today I'm in Bailey's Mills just outside Lisburn in Northern Ireland, and I'm with Lynda Tavakoli, a poet and writer. And if you hear any background noises today, it might be a pheasant in the garden, or you never know, it might be the kettle boiling too, because we're having a wee cuppa here with Lynda. Lynda, you're very welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you very much. It's such an honour to be involved in Eat the Storms, and to have an opportunity to chat a little bit about my poetry. And welcome to my home and to my pheasants, Karen.
Thank you. I watched them on the way in there. It's lovely to see them running around the garden. The garden here and the area here must give you a lot of inspiration, but I know, you grew up, you had a sort of a country upbringing too.
I did. I went to school in Portadown, so it was a towny life from Monday to Friday, but my parents came from Fermanagh, and my father grew up on an island, Inishmore Island, which is the biggest island between the two lochs of Erne. So at the weekends we were bundled into the Hillman Minx and driven all the way to Fermanagh and stayed there in the tiny cottage that my father grew up in, which had no electricity, no running water, but there were about 25 acres of small holding, and we, my siblings and I as children, we had the freedom. We were just set out, we could go over the bog, pretend to be on our little horses, my sister and I, and we would be allowed to go out all day, and then my mum would call us back for our Campbell's chicken soup in the middle of the day. It was a lovely combination of actually having a town life and then having the freedom of the country life as well. It gave me a wealth of prompts then for later poetry, because a lot of my later poetry and the stuff that I do now is based on my childhood experiences actually in Fermanagh.
Mm-hmm. And yet you studied to be a teacher, didn't you, Lynda?
Well, I did study, but thinking about how I started writing, it was probably easier to say that I didn't have much interest at school for academia. I went to a very good school, Portadown College. It was very academic, but my main only interests in a way, were sport and music. So I'm really surprised that I can write a single word now, because I wasn't interested in English literature, English language or anything. I suppose most writers say that their interest started off in their childhood, but to be perfectly honest, mine didn't, and I only started to really write when I was older. But it shows now in my lack of vocabulary, because I have to search for a lot of words, and I've made it a mission of mine to collect verbs, and I collect verbs to try and help me through with my poetry, for my imagery and so on. Yeah.
Well, what prompted the writing then?
The writing came probably, I suppose, up to about 20 years ago now. I had a friend, I had breast cancer when I was in my mid-30s, so I was quite young. And then a couple of years after that, I was contacted by a friend that I'd gone to university with, who also contracted breast cancer, and unfortunately she died about a year later. And I wrote a little piece about her and my relationship, and I sent it into the Belfast Telegraph. And Lynne McDowell of the Belfast Telegraph published it, much to my surprise. But I think they liked the honesty of it, because it wasn't all about my having a really good relationship with this girl. It was about the different things that we shared and the things that we disagreed about. And I suppose there was an honesty in what I'd written, and that led on to me having a little column in the Belfast Telegraph. And after that, I then saw that in the Island Arts Centre in Lisburn, they had a creative writers class, which I thought, well, this will be outside the more factual things that I wrote, and I joined it, and then that was the start of my creative writing.
Mm-hmm. And would you still write the factual sort of opinion-based type articles as well?
Yeah, I do. A couple of years ago, there's Slugger 02 that's more like a political website here, and I contacted them and said, look, I write about human interest stories. I don't get involved, as much as possible, I don't get involved in political aspects of anything. But I write stories about what have affected me and my family and my own life. And it was really good of Slugger. They gave me the opportunity to write for them for a while. And then that led on to the beginning of this year, I write for another website called, it's based really in the Midlands in England, and it's called Central Bylines, and I write a diary entry for them about once every few weeks, and they also allow me to write poetry for them, so it gives me a voice as well for my writing, because it's difficult to get your writing out there at the moment. So
yeah, particularly outside of Ireland. So
well,
it's great
it
that
is,
Central Bylines are doing that.
It's nice that the Northern Ireland voice can be heard as well, which is not a political voice. I want to talk about the people that I know that aren't vocal about Protestant, Catholic, whatever, this side or that side. Most of the people I know are just interested in leading lives that are good lives, decent lives, and that are, you know, that are never, our voices are not really heard that much. So I appreciate it if I'm given the opportunity to say, you know, the things that I believe in.
Yeah, you could, I suppose, you've written about the Middle East as well, and I suppose that goes with your travels. And again, you don't write politically there, so it's lovely to hear poetry and to hear about a country and hear about the sort of the more interesting side of things that we don't hear about on the news.
Yeah, absolutely, Karen, because I mean, my husband, for a start, he's from Iran, so there you go. He's from Iran, I'm from Northern Ireland, so that's a great match. Well, we've been married nearly 40 years, so it hasn't, you know, we've done okay.
Congratulations.
But, you know, we felt that it was important that our children should know both sides of their culture, so that we made it our business that we visited Iran and obviously my husband's family, and learned about, well, I had a lot to learn about Persian culture. At first I thought my husband was an Arab whenever I first met him, because I didn't know anything about the Middle East then. That was in 1980. And, you know, my husband, being him, waited about 3 weeks before he actually said to me, Lynda, I'm not an Arab, I'm a Persian, we're a different race of people, and I don't speak Arabic, which I thought he did. I speak Farsi, which is a completely different language. So I had a lot to learn. The children had a lot to learn as well. And then more recently, about 8 years ago, my husband got a job in Bahrain. So he went there to work, and I went and stayed for a few months at a time. And I learned about Bahraini custom, and because they're all slightly different than Muslim customs in different countries. And then for the past few years, my husband was working in Oman, which is definitely my favourite Middle Eastern country. And they're all very different in their culture, what they offer in their poetry. And I enjoyed all of them, and I've written poetry about all of them. And I've had some things published out there, which I've been very grateful for.
As I noticed recently that you had a poem published by Lothlorien Journal.
I did.
You've had quite a lot published by them, but the title of the poem, What It Does to You, your publisher, which is Arlen House Publications, who published your poetry collection, The Boiling Point for Jam, said this poem draws attention to the cowardly troll actions of those who would silence writers through anonymous threats. Now, that's quite a powerful statement. Clearly, this is something you feel strongly about. And I know with other writers I have spoken to, some are very wary. They like to use their writing in whatever genre to draw attention to things they feel needs to be championed. But sometimes they suffer criticism for it. So would you like to read this for the podcast?
Sure. It can come across as quite threatening, what I've written about. So I want people to accept it the way that it was written, in that it's just a view that I have about trolling, and that sometimes you have to be brave to understand the effects that it can have. Anyway, it's called What It Does to You. It's not a normal poem for me in the way that it's written, because it's written sort of in bits. So it might sound a little bit funny when I'm reading it. What It Does to You. The intrigue, the plain brown envelope, the name misspelt, the address sketchily penned with malevolence by some unknown hand. Interesting. The opening. The folded white A4, the photocopied sheet, no prints but mine, then clever, the 6 lines of loathing magnified in black ink. Really? The follow-up, the police, the questions, the who, why, what, when of the perpetrator, the forensics, the underlying threat. For fuck's sake. The aftermath, the wondering, the knowing that life has altered just like that, the boiling anger at the risk you suddenly need to take just to put your name at the bottom of a bloody poem.
Wow, I think is all I can say. I noticed the reaction to this on Facebook, Lynda, and I know that so many people were quite taken aback by it, and also very much wanting to voice their support for writers, for you and for writers in general. And I think that actually, even if someone hasn't been trolled, I think for people to hear that, it's good for them to understand the risk that any writer takes putting their work out there, and the courage that it actually takes. And I think that there's a real sense of it in that. You mentioned about writing about childhood, and I know you might have a poem for us on childhood, but you've mentioned the lovely childhood, particularly the weekends in Fermanagh. I'm sure that must have prompted a lot of memories for you.
It did. Well, I shouldn't be saying I won, but I won the Westville International Poetry Competition, and that was with a poem that was a bit. It was about my childhood, but it was. I can read that one to you if you would like.
Be lovely.
So this poem, it's called "The Big Freeze," and it was when we were at Inishmore at the farm at night time. Some of the neighbours would call around, and there would be storytelling and a bit of singing or whatever, and they used to tell stories about people who lived across the bog. And like sisters or a brother and sister, or people that they had known in their childhoods. And this was about a couple of sisters, so I just put it into a poem, and it did very well at the Westville competition. The Big Freeze. They were found together, limbs stretched like starched shirts abandoned on a washing line. Fingers stalactose stalagmites of frozen touch. Winter had finally seized them, their black crow cloaks no match for the worst whiteout in 100 years. In stories they were witches, 2 sisters hiding their eccentricities in the anonymity of a bog, magic spells and cauldrons fodder for tale-tellers around the open fires of my childhood. But hiding in the pink dapple of a rogue beach, I had watched them once, their meagre chatter bouncing off each other like the sonar of a bat, their faces soft with kindnesses, as one by one they picked words from the earth and rested them upon the other's mouth like a coming melt of snow.
That's beautiful.
You were mentioning my childhood. I've written a few poems about my sister because I used to experiment with my sister about things like smoking and so on to see how she would react first, and then I'd do it. But there's another poem I wouldn't mind reading, and it was about. It's called Piano Lessons, and it's about. This is when we were in Portadown, and after school once a week we'd go to a piano lesson, and she would go first, and so on. And it's funny the things that you remember. When I'm out in the garden, that's when most of my sort of experiences from the past sort of come to me all of a sudden, and then I remember a certain situation. So this one includes my sister, but it's also about something that stayed with me then later into my school life, and it's called Piano Lessons. This small room, its bay window hunched from long years of partiality to traffic noise outside. My sibling sits at a piano. Hers are the hands I covet, those fingers air kissing the keys, that finely knuckled bridge so effortlessly poised to play. She goes first, being older and better to please our teacher before the stumpy hammerings of my own octaveless stretch. Always on the table while I wait, an encyclopedia. Innards long succumb to seepages of wayward scales and dubious melodies. I know the page, monochrome, edges sepia singed with age, and here they are, ribbon, forked, staccato, bead, sheet, images of sizzling electricity. Better than any piano lessons or teachings in the rooms of my growing up. Wonders unforced, lightning strikes to my reluctant tutelage. She paid attention at school, Karen, and so her use of language is much, much better than mine is.
This could be a wee lesson for all those pupils out there, if they're listening to the Poetry Podcast, to pay attention to your teacher and learn your verbs. Well, I know you pretty well, and I would say you are a very positive person, but I know you've written one about Do Not Speak to Me of Silence, about someone's voice, hearing someone's voice, and I actually, you mentioned it to me earlier on, so I would love you to read that one as well, because I think that's something that we all, I think, I love the sound of a voice, I love the sound of someone reading their own poem, for example, and the voice can either draw you in or sometimes shut you out, so it's the voice is so important, particularly as we remember people. So would you like to tell us about that one?
It's about the actress Helen McCrory, who I just thought had a beautiful voice, and she was in so many things, Peaky Blinders, but she was a fantastic stage actress. I mean, she was a wonderful actress. She was married to Damien Lewis, the actor, and when she died of cancer, would have been in the middle of last year, I thought about him and the young children, and I thought, what do you miss about somebody the most, really, is their presence is in their voice. So that is where this poem came from. I was thinking about him specifically when I wrote it. Do not speak to me of silence. It has been a week since I held your voice, its absence filtering between that final curve of breath and now. I search for its sustain in the fragments of you remaining, shadowed in the sculpture of my empty palms. I will not know this silence you have tricked me with, for even now your voice conceals itself in crevices I have yet to find, that cruel punchline waiting to catch me unawares.
You, I think throughout the pandemic, I know you took great comfort in the garden, and I think you probably have a tree in there for so many different occasions, and in memory of so many different people. You seem to know every plant that you have. It's a beautiful garden. We're sitting here looking out at it, and it's a garden. Sadly, we're on the 1st of December. We're approaching winter, and the leaves. There's a few golden ones left, and we've seen a few pheasants running about. So, tell us about your garden and what this poem means to you.
So this is the longest. I like writing shorter poems. Maybe I just don't have the imagination to write the longer ones, but this is the longest poem I've written. We moved to this house. We built this house nearly 30 years ago. It was on a field. It was just a field. I knew very little about gardening because I hadn't paid much attention to what my parents had done to our own little garden in Portadown, because they were both very good gardeners, but of course I wasn't interested then. So I made a lot of mistakes when I made this garden, because it was a big plot of land, but everything in it I have they come from somewhere within me, or have been transported from somewhere else. Like my dad's tree came from Inishmore. It has a meaning behind it, and not all the trees have names, but most of them are named after people that I have known who are no longer with us. So well, it won't take very long. It's not that long a poem, but each verse is about a different aspect of the garden. And it has given me the greatest pleasure. I've made, like I said, loads of mistakes, planted things in all the wrong places. Things have fallen down when they shouldn't have. But it's still my garden, and probably the poem that says the most about me, I think. So, garden. Edward, you are the holly, pulled by the roots from a memory hedge to grow again in different soil. Away from the tree that claimed you, away from that garden of reminders where your mother's pain looked out upon the thief that had stolen you. But I want to show her the roots of you now, here where underneath the ground they are strong and reaching, and your leaves never shrivel in the blind winds of winter after all this time. Father, you are the bendy beech, drawn from a Fermanagh bog, a sapling twisting your resistance into a foreign home where I transported you just to have your presence close. At your feet, a boot of snowdrops kicks the winter into spring, and from your branches, fingertips of bud await a summer's touch before they flare. And when I listen, cheek pressed close against the roughness of your bark, I hear the rising sap of who you are speaking to me through the quiet earth. Mother, the rose, how could you not be? Grown from a slip you had slipped from somewhere else, your blossoms bleeding pink and red and white, with edges crinkled like the smile that rested easily upon your mouth. Rosa Mundi, there against the garden seat, where stroppy summer sunshine warms your clime in fits and starts, and where a thrush's egg nests unobserved, a soporific embryo of mother scent. Friends, you know who you are, sessile oak and silver birch, willows weeping their remembrance in an autumn helicopter flight of seeds across a lawn. I planted you with care, dug the beds you die in deep, and named you for the losses in my heart. Kindness, beauty, loyalty and love, friendships living on with every rising of a morning sun, and all of you the light that greets the coming day. Garden, necropolis of planted souls, shaped only from the clay of a forgotten field, I have seen you in your nudity and best attire. For nature's fickleness will dress you how she will, decay of leaf and blossom mulched to clothe her growing needs, and every lovely thing that has endured must some day die. But in between the then and now remains those second chances, offering up their promises towards the light.
Beautiful and full of hope. My husband always says gardening, you have to be hopeful to be a gardener.
You do.
So, Lynda Tavakoli in Bailey's Mills, as we look out at the garden, thank you very much. And I'm just hoping I'm going to hear a pheasant call before I go. Thank you, Lynda.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
For my final guest on the show today, I'm delighted to welcome back another returning guest, certainly not a stranger to the podcast, as this guest has been with us for the past couple of seasons, and it's always a pleasure to welcome him back and hear more of his work. He is a poet, historian, a photographer with more than a dozen poetry titles to his name, including Pictures, Postcards, Letters from Kelsey Books and The River Singing from Workhouse Writers Press. This is Lennart Lundh.
Hello, Storm Gourmets. I'm Lennart Lundh, coming you from just outside Chicago as usual. My offering this time around is 5 pieces that touch on storms, real or not real. The first 3 are unpublished pieces. The rainy space between. Beneath the stars, the sun, moons encircling worlds that hold them captive, clouds create a fluid wall obscuring dream-visioned where and what might be. Beneath the clouds, the birthplace sees, and in the rainy space between, our lives, loves, losses equally defined by water, by tears of joy and sadness crying out. Beneath the tides of woe, almost drowned, we're awash. Wash our hands or wring them, and falling in each other's arms, lovers or paramours, are sheltered in the storm. Mutually assured seduction. Some trick of shadows after lightning projected the storm-struck window. Made your eyebrows seem to be bat wings poised to seek blood, or perhaps a condor's bent span while closely examining the buffet. Either of them rising in anticipation of that never repeatable and always remembered first taste, of the savory and changing rolls across the promised hour's feast. Foundations 1. After the painting by Barbara Pompey Boland. The colors of the sky, naked in the sun or swaddled by storms and ash, remain different from the views offered by books we've scavenged. This, a century or more later. There are few of us, our skills insufficient to sustain more. We count the ones who die youngest the luckiest, their days of hunger and disease shortened. This, when there should be generations. Some things still stand tall, but much has fallen and rotted. The old foundations hide beneath plants as alien to the old days as the sky. There will be no civilization too, and this is likely for the best. And two pieces that will be appearing in Cutting a Sunbeam, the collection that will be published by Kelsey Books out of Utah late this year or early in 2023. From the rise at Harbor's End, the lighthouse keeper's daughter watches townfolk hurry beneath the building fury, the pleasant evening's promise blanketed. She turns the pages of the storm with every sense, hoping to predict the night to come. Even her spine feels the thunder that follows the jagged tears in the sky, but to no avail. This chapter book, each ending holding multiverses for the next, confounds faith in any easy climax. The speed of it sucks drapes through open windows. Its shades of darkness suck the light from the tower. The edge of the hole crosses the bar. Please, she whispers into its ear, be kind to those at sea. In the morning and the passing of the storm, the fog lifting slowly to reveal a waiting sun, we leave the village to cross the rocks, to walk the beach, most in search of flotsam and jetsam for profit or use. My nurse and I looking for surviving sailors and those lost but safe in heaven's embrace. On a bad day, the last mark the tide line, perhaps floating indistinguishable from a spar trailing seaweed, the fluke shape of another's leg or arm raised above the sand, while a better day finds, instead or in addition, the cast-up living, succorable, reparable. The best, of course, or uneventful walks on a perfect day. Nothing uncovered but shanties, echoing from well beyond the reef.
Now, a huge thank you to all of my guests, and just before we leave you, there is time for me to share one poem with you. And as I said, this season I'm sharing poems of mine that were published in various publications throughout 2022. And so this one that I'm going to read now is the most recent, as it's just been published by Black Bough Poetry in its now annual Christmas and Winter Edition Volume 3. Huge congratulations to Matthew M.C. Smith on its publication. It is the perfect Christmas gift and is now available over at Amazon. I have been very honoured to be the sub-editor along with M.S. Evans for the past 2 years, and this year there are 3 of my poems included in this anthology, and I'm going to read one of them today as it's especially relevant. As I said last night, we had the first snows here in Dublin, Ireland, and it reminded me of about couple of years ago, I think it was 2011, we had a massive snowstorm here at Christmas, and myself and my mother one day through the blizzard went wandering into the village to visit my grandparents' grave, and this poem describes that journey. This is called Hand on a Headstone. You, in our first blizzard, black down coat over rows of cheek, crows in far field, confused. In crunch of graveyard, brushing back snow flaked across the carve of their names. Wondering if we kept brushing, would they reappear? Resurrections in daydreams, on a white Christmas, too close to comfort. So just a reminder that that poem and many more appear in Christmas and Winter Edition Volume 3, currently available on Amazon from Black Bough Poetry. And now, just before we go, also a shout out to Anik Yerim, who this season on Twitter is running her now traditional Advent with Anik series. This is where she invites poets to read the poems of other poets. So a huge thank you to Anik for bringing light to us on these dark days. And a very Merry Christmas to you all. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, men and women, non-conformers and non-believers, gender X and gender equals, we've reached the end of another episode of Eat the Storms, the Poetry Podcast. My name is Damien B Donnelly. Thank you so much for joining me here today, whether that has been on Spotify, Apple, Anchor, Google, Breaker, Podbean, Player FM, Overcast, Pocket Cast, Castbox, Podcast Addicts, or any of the other platforms where we are now available. This show would be impossible without my guest stars, and today those lights have been Lynne Jensen Lampe, Lundh, Lauren Lawler, and Inside the Storms with Karen Mooney, and today's guest was Lynda Tavakoli. Now, if you enjoyed that interview, please note that of course was the edited down version to suit today's podcast, but if you check out Eat the Storms later on this week, you will find that we will be releasing the full hour-long interview between Karen and Lynda. Now, for details on all of my guest stars today, head on over to www.eatthestorms.com, click on the podcast section, and there you will find a blog post with photos, bios, social media handles, website links, and where to buy their collections. Each blog post is defined by episode, and this was episode 7 of season 6. Now, Christmas is coming. So make sure you either buy the collections of my guests on the show, or else, of course, when you're over at eatthestorms.com, you can also pick up the inaugural issue of The Storms, which makes a perfect gift this season. And speaking of The Storms, our new journal of poetry, prose and visual arts, Eileen Dupuer, my sub-editor for issue 2, and myself have just finished the final replies of yays and nays, and we are now working on pulling together issue 2, which will be with us in January 2023. We had over 2,000 pages of submissions. Now it's been whittled down to just under 100, and my God, The Storms are definitely coming back to greet us next year. Do not adjust your set. Now, in other news, congratulations to Black Bow Poetry's Matthew M.C. Smith, who tonight will release his new collection, The Keeper of Aeons, published by Broken Spine Press. They are kicking off tonight on Zoom, so congratulations to him. And again, congratulations to Anik Yerum, who you can find over on Twitter as Miss Yerum, as she celebrates Advent with Anik, celebrating poets where they are invited to read the poems of fellow poets. Now, that's it from me today. I'm Damien B Donnelly, just to say that myself and Eileen Dupuer tomorrow will be featured on RTE's The Poetry programme. We will be sharing poems from our co-pamphlet in the Jitterfritz of Neon. Eileen will share poems from her Stickleback, and I will be sharing a poem from my full collection, Enough, all published by the Hedgehog Poetry Press. A huge thank you to the RTE Poetry Programme team and to Olivia O'Leary. Now, until next time, if it's snowing, build a snowman. If it's raining, pull up the umbrella and dance. And if it's dark outside, make sure there are enough fairy lights inside to sparkle. I'm Damien B Donnelly, this has been Eat the Storms, and until next time, stay